Hi everyone, I'm Airier, and today we're going to be checking out a fan with too much time, Star Wars with Warhammer 40K. This is going to be Soldiers of the Storm, the second half of it, and we cut off last time at a giant explosion. So we're going to jump right back in because giant explosion. Do I need to explain why I'm interested here? If I do, I would like to refer you to said giant explosion. Me. Explosion. Me. That's really all my personality is. It's just shiny explosions kind of just dragging my attention around like an ADD squirrel that just discovered what intravenous cocaine would look like. I don't want to use that. My entire personality is basically just an intravenous injection of caffeine into a squirrel that then discovers it has ADD, which oddly enough isn't actually cured by caffeine, which oddly enough is the effect. Yeah, I know it's weird, but somehow it still works. Yeah, we're doing this, and we're going to jump right in because explosions, man. I have a one-track mind. It is always explosives. So we're going to just jump right in. You guys know the deal. Link below, original video. Hit it up. And if you haven't, do that. It's good. Fan's a really good writer, and I like saying his stuff. And if you like this video, subscribe, leave a like, and let me know if there's anything I missed because, yeah, I know. Yeah. And let's get started.
It almost seemed to resist the pressure of his digit before sinking into the handle.
I would
the
actually I just want to hear this part again.
Detonated in a row, starting with the one farthest from the barricades and rolling forward with 3 more successive blasts. Each individual charge dwarfed the explosion released by the dying tank on the other bridge, erupting with the power of a weapon meant to tear frigates and destroyers apart. Flesh was peeled from bone in nanoseconds, and the massive warriors, their shields, and the men around them were blown into ashes, with those furthest from the blast centers being scooped up by the bone-grinding shockwaves.
This is honestly kind of one of the coolest descriptions, and it's actually a bit surprising for a reason I'm not sure a lot of people would guess right now. Hearing this kind of horrific explosion and the descriptions of it in a 40K setting, happening to Ogrins, sure, they're there to literally be meat shields. This is honestly par for course. Hearing this kind of description about clones, who are usually fighting against droids, and then seeing them inflict this damage, this is not the description I usually would associate with them. So it's kind of cool seeing that they're going to inflict this kind of wounds. And they're setting up things where this is going to happen. I like this because it shows you, it shows you as the audience that they are going to do things that they don't usually get shown doing up until Order 66. But prior to that, at this point in time, they are still the squeaky clean guys, except for the parts where they're not. And I think there's a lot more of those coming up, and we're a lot more. I'm still finishing Clone Wars, but they don't seem nearly as cut. It's more, oh, they're dead because of a blaster. It's cauterized. This is, yeah, I'm going to cauterize their face right off. It's way more graphic, and I just love that they're the ones doing it.
Raining down as gory giblets over the clones instead of vanishing without a trace. The fortifications cracked, and most of the ray shields there failed, though the final charge was by no means placed very near to the end of the barricades. The whole bridge pitched and rattled, shedding metal and struts like a Jabimi mud dragon shedding flakes of dead skin. By the time the 4 fiery blasts had fully concluded, they had not left one large hole burned through the structure, but rather had left the entire structure of the bridge completely skeletal, with gaps and pitfalls now riddling its creaking.
The bridge survived? I mean, it's creaking, it's going to give out, but okay, credit where credit's due. Star Wars, they have some pretty damn good construction techniques. I've heard that it's not actually a stability of the materials itself, it's more just stabilizers and technology holding it in place through tractor beams, force fields, other BS high-end tech. And honestly, if they could survive that and still maintain some credibility or cohesion, yeah, no, that's impressive.
Swaying surface. It was a testament to Axumite architecture that the whole thing did not simply collapse into the chasm it spanned, where it would fall for hours before coming to rest hundreds of kilometers down.
Hours. To give you an idea, it's only minutes to free fall from orbit on Earth. I'm assuming this is just fans saying something that just sounds cool, because unless this planet is so incredibly massive and has such a weird gravitic relationship that it's way too small for its size, you would be falling for minutes at a long point. Hitting half an hour would be long. Hours is, like, this is falling into Jupiter's atmosphere type sizes. And even then, I'm not sure if it would be a full hour or two, if that. I don't actually quite know how big their atmosphere is, because we don't really know where the atmosphere ends and the liquid that makes up the core begins. It's, or if there would be a point where the gas would be thick enough to actually repulse matter that normally wouldn't be, because it's just pressurized. I don't know. Yeah, whatever. So yeah, I'm just going to ignore that part.
The display of absolute destruction, coupled with the very nearly untraversable state of the bridge, finished the work the ambushes and blaster volleys should have completed long before now.
They had a backup
the enemy
to the backup.
Fully broke. The first bridge began an unabashed and disorganized retreat, running back the way they had come, taking even more fire as the ATTE tanks which remained in their ambush points began blasting once more, taking holes out of their routing army, even as they attempted to sprint all the way back to their besieged base.
What about the forward
65
units?
Smiled behind his helmet, feeling...
Oh, because the forward units weren't the ones he was focusing on, because they couldn't find the commander, who was in a lieutenant's uniform, or a sergeant's. I don't know what rank he was prior to being promoted to a general. So they didn't know it was him. So he's ahead, and that also means he's cut off from the rest, but they don't know he's... Ooh, this is going to be good.
A surge of confidence bolster him unexpectedly. After their recent losses, he had feared these Imperials were invincible. Their weapons too powerful to overcome. Their warriors, gods, marching in legion lockstep. But while their technologies were formidable, and the mettle of their warriors far exceeded that of most cultures in the galaxy, they were no immortals. With proper tactics, cunning, and intersecting lines of fire, anything, even these monsters, could be put down.
Yeah.
Commander 65! Commander! We're taking fire! The enemy has taken up positions at the upper levels of the mall. They're blasting us.
Yep, this is the previous...
A sudden, urgent message came from his priority comm, and a glance told him it was from the ATTE tanks that had been positioned for the third ambush. So it seemed those imps were going to make more noise than they already had. He grit his teeth and responded. This is Commander 65. Pull back. You are to pull back now. Draw yourself away and to the north until we have cleared your ambush point.
Oh, that's neat. Sorry, what Fan just did there in the vocal cue, his voice didn't pitch much differently than usual, but he talked in a very clipped method. It's really fast, but he's very much keeping the tenence and the cadence of his voice at a very fast level. It's actually very hard to do. You don't usually talk like that. You let your words draw into each other. But that one, because he was in a stress situation, you could see the commander, the clone we're listening to, whose voice, whose head we're stuck in. We're seeing how when they're talking, it becomes very clipped. In his head, when he's doing his internal thoughts, it's not like that. So one, good for Fan to immediately audio differentiate him, which is something you would only get in the audio aspect, because in a book itself, reading the narrative, you wouldn't get that unless someone does specific weird ways of writing. And I'll be honest, no. Just, you read Tom Sawyer once, you realize, I hate this. I hate this style of writing. I hate the freaking variations of writing being displayed on the page, because you're not entirely sure if you're reading it wrong or someone just decided to vomit on this keyboard when they tried to retype it, and you can't tell. This, though, is a good way to show that in an audio format, because you know it's exactly what they mean. So I really like that little technique he put in there, because it also shows a clipped, precise nature of someone, and they're going to have a bad time because they're about to break. They're basically Obsidian. Hard, really gritty, really tough, and if you find the right place, they're going to break horribly.
There was no response. 65 repeated himself, and again, nothing came back.
Not under attack anymore.
He almost spat into his helmet, looking towards the third bridge once more, and seeing the flashing and hearing the telltale booms through the audio enhancers in his binoculars, but seeing nothing directly. Not yet. He glanced back towards the second bridge, which was still an active battle. There he saw with no small amount of frustration that the more organized soldiers in green and tan had truly managed to dig in using nothing more than the armored corpses of their own fallen.
Yeah.
Now they were engaged in a standing firefight with the clones at the...
You know, there's a joke in there about, Cadia stands. Also, Cadia is using itself as its own corpse to hide, so... Yes, I'm making a joke about them using the dust of their blown-up planet. Too soon? Although I know a few KD players who actually do take that personally. I'm an ass and I do rib them.
Barricades, no longer moving forward, but exchanging attacks. From the looks of it, they had lost so many men to create their own barricades, and those barricades in question were so disadvantageously positioned compared to those of the clones that the conclusion was foregone. Even if they fought to the last, they would lose.
Are they?
Move the defense forces that have been positioned at the first bridge to the third, and tell them to prepare for an enemy assault. Give them the same firing orders. 65 said. He watched as those clones, which had retreated from the cover of the first bridge, now formed up and marched to the barricades that had been set up at the third. And these barricades were the most extensive of all. Thicker, with multiple layers to allow comfortable overlapping lines of fire. Repeating blaster cannons were mounted every 5 meters along the frontmost layers, and mortars had been set up in the rear.
Nice.
These precautions he had taken due to the fact that the third bridge was the only bridge which bore no baradium mines. The enemy had no way of knowing this, of course, but he had layered more conventional defenses there to make up for the lack of charges. It had been tempting to consider mining all of the bridges, but while he and his men could move between all the buildings and platforms of the city using the smaller, interconnecting walkways and access passages, these larger roads were the only methods for his walkers to travel about. And
and that's why they didn't just blow the bridges completely. They still need to use it themselves when they're done. Okay, that makes a lot more sense, because I was kind of wondering why they didn't just coordinate so that they would just take out the two sides of the bridge and fall, well, whatever was on it to their death, as opposed to just blowing out what was on it, because they're intending to use it. I'm assuming maybe planning for future repairs, which, yeah, but also, that's really presumptuous. Granted, they're probably expecting to win prior to coming here, and that plan is probably still in effect. Not sure why it would be, considering how they've handled it so far. And even his previous talk about it being warriors that can die because they finally saw them die. He would not like fighting clones. I was going to say clones. Wow. Technically, that's Krieg still coming up. Although I'm not sure they are clones. I'm not sure what Krieg actually is now I think about. Flash grown? Maybe. Just Space Marines. I can't wait till we get to that.
Cutting them all off would prevent him from reinforcing the general, should she need it. Satisfied with the enforcement of his orders, the commander allowed his eyes to wander back to the far side of the third bridge, where they widened. Standing in ranks at the other end of the span, he saw them.
What?
They were almost fully assembled already, moving with the same bred precision that 65 himself had seen all his life in his own brothers. But there was something else there, something he could not define, but that shook a part of him deep within. These new imps were standing shoulder to shoulder. They wore black uniforms and coats, and their faces were completely hidden behind archaic rebreathers.
I just got what this is. It's Krieg, who are based on stormtroopers from World War II, and the clones who become stormtroopers from Star Wars. Well, I mean, they don't become, but they're replaced by the stormtroopers and have very similar armor. I just realized this is technically a mirror match of how two different universes interpreted stormtroopers. Oh my god, the irony is completely ironic. I know I just did a tautology there, but that's kind of hilarious to me.
They hefted thick rifles of the kind the Dia cult seemed to favor, and raised banners and standards high, though their meanings were lost on the clone. Soon they were in position, thousands and thousands of them, standing at attention in thick blocks.
Then came the order to march. They were so silent that 65 could actually hear them through the electro-binoculars, the translation matrix in his helmet translating the language for him as it was spoken. superimposing the meaning naturally.
Oh, wow.
First rank, ready! The men of the first rank stomped, bringing their rifles down to point forward. Ready! The men of the first rank stomped, bringing their rifles down.
Sorry, this is something fans been doing a lot more in the videos as they've gone. Just those little audio cues matching what you hear. So when you hear the ready and you hear the stomp, and then he starts talking about, because it's just, this is really good audio design. I'm not the best person when it comes to audio design because my ears suck. But just hearing that and knowing it's exactly what we're looking at, it's just so freaking cool. It adds so many more dimensions to this. The same way his voice acting is. It's crazy just how much in the episodes I've watched already it's come, and I just love this.
Down to point forward in unison. The officer, dressed a little differently from his men, but holding a sparking, shimmering cavalry saber aloft in his hand, lowered it to point towards the enemy in sync with the bayoneted barrels of his men's guns. Charge!
Sure.
The first rank broke off from
great
the rest,
choice.
first marching, then jogging, and finally running, all as one. 65 watched on in sick fascination, counting the seconds as they approached, and then passed the line into the kill zone. His men opened fire, once more becoming a storm of death, even more so than before. The repeaters strafed the front line, dropping Imperials in swaths of burning armor and flesh. Yet those behind them did not pause, balk, hesitate, or even slow down as they trampled their own fallen. The dead, the wounded, it mattered not. The officer was blasted into chunks by the focused fire of over 100 DC-15A blaster rifles.
For anyone else, that might matter. For Krieg, it's a normal day. He gave the only order he had. Advance. And that's the only one that needs to be given at this point. Sorry, I love seeing the sheer shock that comes with fighting Krieg and watching as the absolute disregard for survival is thrown right in their face. Because even the clones, who are, well, very similar here to all the ways we've talked about already, they have respect and desire to not die horribly. Krieg, on the other hand, due to a religious belief that they need to die to redeem themselves, and honestly, they just keep doing it because it's effective. They don't care. Death is the option they're looking for. And it's just so freaking cool to see this from the other side, to see that horror from a human perspective.
But not one of the masked troopers turned to look, save for the one who went to retrieve his sword, lifting it into the air and wordlessly taking his position. That was another thing that 65 began to notice, the utter silence of them. Occasionally, one of the struck or dying would cry out, but even then, the majority of them simply fell silently, dying even less dramatic deaths than droids. They were so silent he could hear the next whistle, despite the distance. Second rank, ready! The clone commander's eyes departed the scene of death at the front to draw his vision back to the rear of the bridge.
Like, this is the part that
there,
does it.
he saw the scene repeating itself, the troopers preparing to begin their death march. Charge!
Oh, they're going straight
Came
to charge.
the call, and they did. Meanwhile, the first rank was making surprisingly good headway. Where men would begin to tire, these masked soldiers only sped up. And where men would slow, if only to carefully step around the dead and dying, these men paid no heed. Indeed, seemed well trained in the grotesque art of stepping over bodies without losing their balance.
Yep, that is the best way to put it.
Their losses were hideous, but they bore them as if they were nothing, as if they themselves were already the walking dead. Get under the 15% of our artillery firing on the third column, just the third. The commander told his artillery officer. The clone nodded and...
Oh. I know I'm the person who just said that maybe they should fire the tanks at this guy just to take him out now. But I just realized why that would be an issue. He's taking it off one of the other bridges and putting it here, which would give at least some respite to the other side. Because Krieg is doing what Krieg does, and basically they're not so much a distraction kind of effect as a, oh fuck, they're not dying, why are they still coming effect. It's like the zombie effect. Yeah, they're basically Imperial zombies. They're slow comparatively to some of the really fast shit. But they're basically just, they're going to walk up, they're going to die, but they'll fuck you up in the process. And the zombie part is because when you see how much it costs to get them, your wallet will die and come back to life when you drag it to the counter to pay. That might sound like a bad metaphor, but if you've seen the prices of Krieg prior to some plastic models coming out, yeah. No, I'm not even going to tell you what the price is just because I've seen it, and that was prior to 2 years of inflation at Forge World. It would be just wrong to put the current number out.
And turned to see the work be done. Soon, death was raining thickly down upon the first ranks of these uncaring soldiers, blasting them apart, searing through them as medium laser cannons scythed into their ranks. 65 felt a smile of relief slip onto his face as the entirety of the first rank died just as they reached the halfway point, falling without ceremony. Their legacy was left as nothing more than a trampled line of the dead and the mostly silent dying who lay among them. Those that could picked themselves up and attempted to continue their charge,
they got the chaos
while
guy.
others did what they could to heft their
Krieg is
weapons
going at him
and
with
fire from where they
flippers.
fell.
Oh my god.
All but those that managed to pull themselves
Yes,
to the
that's
very
Krieg, all right.
sides of the bridge were crushed to death under the boots of their brothers in the second rank, and the sight killed any joy 65 had felt. Already, the second rank was being mauled to death, but they had walked past the halfway point,
Yep.
which meant another
Next
whistle.
comes the
Third rank, ready? For the Emperor, charge! 65 had seen this
British on
kind of
that
thing before. This was the start of a situation that was about to roll out of his control, and he had to stem the turn now.
He's not going to, though. I have no idea how many total ranks they have, but this is only the third, and they're already halfway there. I mean, yeah, the first 2 ranks are dead, but this is Krieg. That's not a surprise or a problem.
I want 50% of all of our artillery capacity going to the third bridge.
Yeah,
Everything we've
he's going
already
where I did.
reallocated, plus
He's
whatever
freaking
else we
out.
need to get us there. 65 ordered.
This is giving
Sir,
everyone
General
else time.
Sakura is relying on that support, the officer said. 65 grit his teeth, eyes focused on the far side of the bridge again. Half rank! Ready!
And there's the fourth. How many ranks do they have?
That's why we were only taking 50%. Now follow my orders, soldier, the commander snapped. Sir,
How
yes,
much
sir,
time is he
the clone
buying
said
the other guys
hastily,
then, by
relaying the
taking so much
commands.
pressure off them?
65 almost held his breath as he watched the orders take effect and breathed out a sigh at the results. The second rank was obliterated in short order, and while the third rank had made progress, it certainly would not be enough now with this new rate of loss. The bridge was almost shaking with the amount of fire being poured onto the wide mouth of the avenue.
Again, surprisingly hasn't
Idly,
fallen.
his eyes moved back to the rear of the line and bulged in his skull.
What?
Death Riders! First cadre! Ready?
Oh, no. It's clone Death Rider. No. He's hearing the Death Riders from Krieg. Oh, yeah, it's the really freaky horses. Oh, I forgot about these things. They're honestly batshit terrifying. And they're huge, too. They're not like horse size. They're kind of like small elephant-sized, but a little more streamlined. Not entirely, but also bulky enough that that's a comparison you can actually make. There's models, but apparently the art and lore for them actually makes them sound even bigger. It's actually kind of hilarious. I love it.
Came the call. But it was not men who stomped in response. It was horses. A line of cavalry made up of
they know what
enormous
horses are?
claw-hoofed horses
even know they knew that.
bearing more masked men, each one wielding a long
Yup.
lance or spear. They lowered
cavalry
these
charge.
weapons as the infantry had done with their rifles.
I swear that was the screen, yeah. Joking aside. Dude.
Charge! The beasts leapt forward at the command, and 65 struggled to keep them in view of his binoculars. They ran so fast, like speeder bikes propelled by raw, unnatural muscle. In
Probably
seconds,
actual
they were
machine
coming
parts.
up on the trail of the nearest group of soldiers, and
How
then,
biological.
with leaps so long and powerful they nearly appeared to take flight, the horses lunged over the entire fourth rank and began gaining on the third. But, despite the metal masks which covered the faces of the speeding beasts, They were mostly naked animals, and 65 had faith that they too would disintegrate in the withering hail of blaster fire and artillery that was, even then, decimating the third rank. He was horrified to find he was wrong. The horses leapt the thinning remains of the third rank and began to weave. Looking carefully, 65 could see that the beasts performed these maneuvers without the need of the riders to direct them. The riders focusing on bracing their lances and keeping balance as the animals bounded to and fro, leaving trails of blaster fire in their wake. Those caught in crossfire or blast.
He's describing the horses dodging bullets. This is bullshit and I love it. He's literally doing Matrix horses. Oh my god. I guess this horse knows Kung Fu. I'm not going to apologize for that one.
By the artillery rain showed incredible resilience, either shrugging off the wounds completely or requiring an absurd amount of trauma to put down. Nothing exemplified that more than the two-legged horse. Now riderless, it had suffered a near direct strike from a sniper tank, which had taken the back half of its body clean off. Its intestines had snagged and pulled free, but the beast seemed not to heed its own destroyed body in the least. Blood gushing from its rent form as it galloped forward on just its front legs. The sound the beast made into its metal faceplate was almost as horrible as the sight of its charging form. 65 found himself transfixed, but then he noticed the artillery fire around the abomination thinning and realized how close it and the others of its kind were getting to the barricades. Oh, Scrug. Get the fire squads ready to take their shots. Tell them to be careful not to hit the back of the fortifications, but tell them to expect possible enemy assaults getting around the barricades. He ordered. The commander looked back towards Bridge 2 and cursed again. The battle was going well, but it was still going. He reached into his belt and pulled out his second detonator. Tell the defense force at Bridge 2 to break off and get ready. He started to say, but it was too late. The Death Riders had reached the fortifications, most of their number still intact and fighting, but they did not deal any death onto the men of the barricades. Well, most of them didn't. The two-legged horse threw itself into one of the firing emplacements, even as the creature itself was turned to ribbons by it. Its speeding corpse collided with the gun, dislodging it and crushing the clone who had been manning it.
They're taking out the
others, however, leapt over the whole defense force, landing behind them and continuing their charge.
They're flanking.
But what were they charging at, if not the troopers?
Artillery.
The answer was obvious. The sniper tanks. 65 looked at his infantry command officer and shoved the detonator into the man's hands. Take this! Get all the men manning the second bridge defense here! Now! Activate the charges when they are clear, then pick up a rifle and help me! He yelled. The clone nodded, and 65 turned to his opposite side as he climbed down from the top of the cannon. You! Sound the alarm! We are about to be attacked! He ordered the artillery officer, who now stood beside him. The clone saluted and did as ordered while 65 strapped himself into the turret.
Okay. You might have missed it there because I actually only caught it at the end because I'm so caught in the narrative. But, oh, I love these pictures. I'll go back to the second. Here, right when you're listening to 65 talk, remember his earlier clipped way to talk, where it's like very professional, very clipped, very, well, I keep saying clipped, but it's accurate. It's a very intense way. But when he's talking now, he's still clipped, but he's talking faster and there's way more inflection that Fan is putting into the voice. So you can see that he's becoming panicked. I love this.
You! Sound the alarm! We are about to be attacked! He ordered the artillery officer, who now stood beside him. The clone saluted and did as ordered while 65 strapped himself into the turret and activated it.
Also,
the servos of the turret came alive, and the targeting display filled his view, a display he quickly manipulated to hone in on the advancing steeds. They were charging past the fire squads now, who opened up with their flamethrowers, catching nearly a quarter of the advancing horsemen in the fiery maws of their weapons. But for all that, not one of the Imperials stopped, both beasts and riders advancing forward with the same ferocity they had displayed before being set ablaze. He set the cannon to auto-load his shots, which would give him the quickest rate of fire on his slow gun, and honed in on his first target, the only rider among them whose face was bare. Though the riders were cast in shadows, the clouds now having obscured the Axumite sun completely, he could see that his target was a woman, and likely the leader of this charge. He had already seen how ineffective targeting their leader was when it came to blunting the charges of these masked
Is this
men.
the Inquisitor or
but
someone else?
That still meant that she was as good as any other
Probably
target.
someone else.
He pulled the trigger. The cannon thunked and fired, its solid shell spiraling as it pierced the air in a high-pitched howl of death. But the horse leapt clear of the shot, and the shallow crater he had created
Goddamn!
availed him nothing. He grit his teeth, trying to fire again, only to receive a red warning reticle.
I realize what this is. The horse has freaking ultra instinct. Call it fast twitch nerves, whatever you want. But basically, yeah. Horses dodging bullets. This is insane, and I love every second of it.
Which reminded him that the gun was not ready for the next shot. The
Of
ball
course,
turrets in front of the walker began to open fire, strafing and cornering two of the riders, having far more luck by combining their efforts than he was having alone. 65 found her again, and fired just as the rolling sound and shockwaves of the Baradium charges rocked everything around them. And he missed. Blast it! He yelled, kicking the console and unstrapping himself, climbing onto...
And there we have it. The first actual break. Not just panic, but an actual outburst. I was waiting for this, and honestly, we're getting to it pretty fast. It's not just that he's getting overrun. It's that his careful planning is all coming to naught, and he can't seem to do something as simple as just to hit a target he has a beat on. Because, honestly, the horse is bullshit. This guy is just... He's breaking, and we're seeing it in such a great way. I love this.
To the side of the gun and down until he was standing on top of the walker's cockpit. The clone commander grabbed his DC-15A, which was slung around his torso, and braced it in one arm as he used his offhand to draw his blaster pistol. No sooner had he managed it than the first three-legged sniper tank fell to the ground not far from him.
Oh.
First rocked by a sudden explosion before toppling over. It was the lances. They were explosive. The riders would rush by, jamming their weapons into the third supporting leg of the sniper tanks, breaking the heads off and riding away moments before they detonated, throwing the walker to the ground. And then he saw three riders coming for him and his six-legged ATTE. They had no way of easily toppling something like this, so he knew they would aim for the cockpits in the front. And that was why he had positioned himself there. Compensating for the speed of his bolts, with experience and rate of fire, 65 began blasting with both weapons, veering them into the path of the first rider. His high-powered shots blew small, circular troughs into the ground as 65 tried to chase and catch the speeding Imperial with his weapons. Crying out in furious elation when he finally managed it, blowing the rider away, though the beast charged on.
And there's still
but
the
he
other
paid
riders.
the animal no heed. It was the lances and their bearers that he was...
And he's getting tunnel vision, and we're seeing that. Dude. There's actually something I'm really glad fans doing right now. And it's kind of silly when you think about it, but it's something that is actually hard to do. A lot of the times when someone's doing this, they'll pull back just a little bit and go into an omniscient point of view to say that the character is having tunnel vision. Technically, it's a perfectly valid way to write, and I just don't like it. Because I think it pulls you out of the narrative a bit to tell you what you could just see by having it written well. And here we're having it written well because we're being shown he's getting tunnel vision. He's hyper-focusing on this. He's not looking at the entire battle like in the very beginning of this video. He is, well, he's not the commander anymore. He's an individual infantry lineman who just happens to be on top of this. And people would listen to, but he's already abdicated his position to someone else to go fight because he is into this. He is hyper-focused and he is ignoring everything else because he's only looking at this, including the other riders who he's not hitting. Honestly, I love this because he's breaking and we're seeing a mental breakdown in process because he can't keep up in the very literal way and in a very mental way as well. It's well done.
Was concerned with. The commander oriented onto the next masked rider, this one blazing with fire as a result of the flamethrowers.
Still on fire.
65 began pelting the imp and his beast with shots. But despite this, the man did not die, and he did not falter, no matter how brutal the rain of punishment that assailed him became. In the end, the charging warrior was stopped by the ball gunners beneath the commander, who clipped the horse's legs out from under it, causing the beast to begin to fall and pitch forward. Maddeningly, the rider managed to rise on his saddle and threw himself forward the instant before the war beast beneath him fell and rolled to an agonized death. Lance still in hand, body aflame, he seemed to lunge with his weapon thrust out, though still he did not cry out or scream. Not that doing so would have saved him from Commander 65's continuing hail of blaster fire, which slammed into the Imperial cultist the moment he lost the ability to duck and weave. However, the lance still flew forward and struck one of the ATTE's 6 legs, blowing it off and causing the tank to jerk and list to the left. 65 found himself sliding down the flat roof of the cockpit, and his eyes widened as the third rider came upon them. He tried to fire at it, but his shots were wild and inaccurate, as were those of the ball gunners. Without thinking, he roared and threw himself forward moments before the enemy's exploding lance smashed into the cockpit of the walker. The explosion helped to propel him through the air as his path came to intersect that of the third rider, dropping his rifle and letting it hang by its strap as he extended his arms. His soaring tackle connected a moment later and threw the rider clean off the horrific horse.
Did he just... soaring tackle? He just wrestling moved this guy. Okay, props for this guy. Even if he's having a mental breakdown, he is definitely competent at fighting, if not at winning this battle as a commander.
Horse which bore the Imperial into battle. They both hit the ground hard and rolled in the churned, loamy earth. 65 rose first, head swimming, utterly disoriented as chaos reigned all around him. The tank crews were doing their level best to fight off the sudden flash assault, but they were unprepared. Without speeder bikes of their own, catching and killing the riders was proving more than difficult, and walkers were dropping and exploding left and right. He was so dazed by the sight that he almost didn't react in time to avoid being pulverized. The rider he had knocked off the horse had come for him. Unmasked, face set in a furious, bloodthirsty grin as she curved her enormous, sparking fist down towards him. He threw himself out of the way just in time, her blow causing a flash of light and a cascade of dirt to rain down all around them. She withdrew her fist from the crater she had created and turned to face him again, her sadistic expression appearing even more shockingly
this is definitely the Inquisitor
than it had depicted over the targeting computer of the turret. "You!" 65 yelled, raising the blaster pistol still clutched in his hand and firing. She growled like an animal and swept her fist in front of her, the sparking oversized gauntlet there shimmering as it absorbed the blaster bolts. Her other hand whipped up and out, wielding one of the thick, bizarre bolt pistols of the Imperial Command class. He kept firing to keep her from taking steady shots, but he felt the rush of death thrill his entire system as he leapt up, zigzagging as he fired. He could feel the showers of dirt tossed up by the exploding ammunition of her weapon, could feel the shocks of the stone and metal shrapnel
Now, this is interesting. This is actually a change that is really not what I was expecting, but it's really good that he did. Specifically, early on, I mentioned, actually in the previous video where we covered this, a lot of this personality, not just the fact that he's becoming less clipped, he's becoming a mental breakdown, but it's not just that. We're seeing it now in a very specific way that I really appreciate. What he's doing here is focusing on the visceral descriptions as opposed to the clinical ones in the beginning. So not only are we being shown how he's interacting, we're being shown how his mental state reflected by what we're hearing him describing is going. Early on, we had no impression about what he thought of things on an emotional level. Here, everything in the last couple sentences was a visceral, emotional reaction that was described to us. I love this because he's completely got rid of the entire precision persona and he's moved into the visceral. I feel. It feels this way. Where before, nothing like that was said. This is... it's just good. This is good writing. This is a great example of how you show a character breaking. And it's such an easy thing to break because, specifically break in a narrative, because if you go into too much emotional detail early on, it's not the worst thing. It's not even a bad thing. But the fact that this did have the very clinical descriptions to very emotive descriptions here is great.
scrape and scratch against his armor as he moved and fired to stay alive. But then she shot right where he planned to step, and while the bolt had detonated before he had moved his foot there, it had succeeded in creating a heated slurry out of the earth. And as he pressed his weight down, the commander found himself slipping, falling, and leaving him helpless before the muzzle of her gun.
Damn.
But to his surprise, the shot she sent to finish him swung wide.
What?
A small hail of blaster bolts rained into her from the left, making her scream as she was sent sprawling to the earth, her gun arm cooked to ruination.
Ooh.
The infantry officer ran forward, a long blaster rifle held out as he approached, shooting the Imperial a few more times to keep her down before coming to his commander,
not the Inquisitor,
helping him up out of the dirt. He saluted to 65, not waiting for acknowledgement as he began to report. Second half of the defense group is heading here now, sir, even as we speak. First half is still holding the bridge. 65 nodded and slapped the man's shoulder pad, elated to be alive. Good. Call in the medical assault ships. We're going to have a lot of wounded, and we may need the support besides, the commander said. The officer saluted again and began relaying the orders. 65 took the time to survey the battle, and after a few pained moments of observation, wished he hadn't.
What?
The Flame Company was uselessly chasing horses around along with the survivors of the tank crews and what few troopers had still been here. The defense force would arrive soon, but until then, they had almost no way of stopping the cavalry running amok. Already, 65 could see that they had used up most, if not all, of their lances, and had switched to swiping at men with sabers and firing pistols with their free hands.
Yeah?
He and his men needed some kind of ace, a pincer, something to counterattack with. Also, tell the ATTEs on the other side of the chasm. 65 added, a plan starting to form in his mind. To come in from behind the enemy force, and the commander was cut off as the officer in front of him was suddenly blasted into 1,000 pieces. The force of the blow which dismembered the clone enough to send 65 himself falling back a few feet. He scrambled in the dirt, wiping at the gore covering his visor as he looked up at the form that loomed over him. Dyed red by the blood and backlit by dark, roiling clouds which churned.
Oh, it was the previous imp. They weren't dead.
And hummed with distant lightning. The female commissar that he had watched his officer
was the commissar.
Put down staggered into view. Blood dripped from her chin,
She's
and
smiling,
half her
isn't she?
face was seared. Her gun arm hung limply, clearly useless at her side, and the uniform around her torso was pockmarked with blaster burns, which revealed the cracked and hissing ceramite armor beneath. Though her expression was still one of unremitted bloodthirst, she was no longer grinning. "Disgusting slave replicate!" She spat, each word slathered in malice.
I'm assuming she's talking about them being clones, but at the same time, she is working with Krieg. Hypocrisy, not a big deal.
The deranged Imperial dragged herself forward, and he raised his pistol, opening fire on her. The woman in red snarled and blocked the shots easily, staggering closer and then halting, a look of mortal fury coloring her face.
What?
65 wondered what had happened until he saw the white armored boots begin to filter into his vision. He looked around and found the defense group had finally arrived. The men surrounding her, rifles out and aimed towards her. She staggered back,
no way she's going
her leg, which had been clearly wounded in the volley, almost giving out with the movement. His troopers helped him up, and 65 aimed his pistol at the woman. "Disgusting, murderous cultist!" He spat back at her. Her burnt face flushed, and she staggered forward, falling to one knee with the act, her weaponized fist sparking and pulsing, but unable to reach him. 65 removed his blood-streaked helmet, handing it to the man next to him as he sneered at her. She screamed her defiance in response, and he silenced her cry with one shot. The woman dropped backward into the dirt, never to rise again.
Gonna be completely honest, if they try to take her alive, she's an Imperial Inquisitor. That's probably a bad idea. This is the right choice, but I'm kind of surprised they didn't try. Is what I would say, except this guy is being pushed to the point of, let's just say, if there was any chaos around right now, he would be getting offers. Because he is well past self-control. He wanted her dead, and he's enjoying it right now. Whew.
her fury branded on her face as clearly as the hole in her head.
Yeah.
All around them, the rest of the defense force was already engaging with and hunting down the maddened cavalry. The next several minutes saw the clones massing to corner and drag down each and every single one of the Imperial horsemen, none of whom ever chose to retreat, despite ample opportunity to do so. By the time the last of them had been blasted to death, much more time had passed than 65 would have considered acceptable.
That's why Krieg does it.
Soon, a new officer was selected to take the place of the man the mad woman had killed, and he stood by awaiting orders. Looking about, the commander could see that spirits were shockingly low. The artillery had been devastated, much of the command staff killed, and the barricades were moments away from meeting the ranks of the enemy.
Technically, he's describing them, they're winning. But it does not feel like that, because even though Krieg was wiped, they did what they do. They broke the enemy, and as soon as anything else comes up, if the Imperials have any reinforcements, yeah, they're going to have a much easier time.
Close quarters. Despite the successes thus far, things had become suddenly bleak, and above them all, rumbling clouds which sparked and flashed began to release the very first drops of what was sure to be another of Axum's freezing rains. 65 grit his teeth and stepped forward. Conditions. Come on, troopers! Do I need to remind you of the strategic importance of our position here? He gestured with his pistol towards the shining buildings of Azure City, now lit by their internal lights as the rumbling storm stole the daylight.
Wow.
Look back there! See those buildings?
Stabilization.
They are full of the people we are here to save. This whole planet is! Our mission is to take this city and take it swiftly. Being down on ourselves is a luxury the Republic cannot afford. We are the key to the General's assault. The other battalions are counting on our support. If we fail, everyone fails. Do you all understand this? Sir, yes, sir! The men around him roared. Then get your fire back! We have hard work ahead, and it's only going to get harder! Defense teams, move to reinforce the barricades and pull back the wounded! Fire teams, form a defensive line and defend what's left of our artillery! We are fighting without their support from now on.
Yeah, fighting without the artillery, that's gonna make this rougher. I'm honestly surprised this guy survived. I literally thought this would be an example of the Imperials overrunning, maybe taking horrible losses, but why do I have the feeling this guy's going to become a problem? Not so much for the Imperials, but for the Republic. I've been told every faction is represented in this at some point in usually very interesting ways. There's a lot of cultists out there, and when they invest, they took an entire sector, right? There was probably at least a couple cultists in there. I haven't seen any chaos yet, but this guy, I'm kind of curious what that would look like if they start making inroads with the Star Wars side.
Everything that is left needs to go to General Sakura. Are you ready? Sir, yes, sir, they said again. Commander 65 raised his hand and clenched his fist as if to catch the falling rain, which was, even then, beginning to blanket them all, turning the dirt into mud, and burying the Commissar's broken body under fresh slurries of liquid earth. We are the clones of Camino, the soldiers of the storm. We will save the Republic, no matter the cost. Now, move out!
Save the Republic at all costs. Oh. I've talked about the irony of that. It's not something I haven't said before, but every time you hear it, man, it's like, they're like, what, a couple months out from not being a Republic anymore? And that was this entire pile of a man having a mental breakdown and just shattering his personality. I love this. I love seeing what's going on here, and I'm a little surprised he survived, which I mentioned, but specifically because I thought he was going to be an example of showing how far you can push a very stereotypical clone before we go on to a named one and seeing what they're put through in the same circumstance. Apparently here, no, we're getting a character who's going to move forward. The Commissar dying, did not expect that because they were given such a great description early on, but they're a Commissar for Krieg. There's only so many ways that goes unless they win. I love this one though, because it's showing something that is really damn good. It's not just that he broke, and you saw it, They didn't have to tell you that he broke. You saw that he broke in what he was describing and how he was talking, in the cadence of his voice, how Fan was acting out the character. This is just really good. In multiple ways, beyond just the narrative itself and how it's described, it's setting up so much, and I want to see where this goes. Is there another follow-on to this specific side story? If there is, let me know so I can maybe jump to it. Or if I need to wait, let me know that too, because I'm very tempted. I'll keep going. And I'm pretty sure we got a bunch coming up next because there's a lot here. Actually, what do we have next? After Soldiers of the Storms is a Dark Transmission. I have no idea what that is, and I will avoid spoilers by looking ahead. But it's tempting. So, yeah. For everyone who knows anything I missed, let me know. If this guy is important, I want to ask, but I know better. Don't tell me spoilers. I want to find out what's going on. I kind of like how all the characters I think are red shirts. Some are, some aren't, and it's actually surprising. You can't quite tell who's going to win, other than some characters who have name potential and just won't be killed off because it'd be unsatisfying. They might be very, very fucked over, I've been told, but maybe not die yet. It is very tempting to go on and immediately record the next one, but it's a different day than when I started recording. I really shouldn't do these so late at night. I hope I didn't wake up my wife. Oops. So yeah, I'm going to go and apologize for being this loud this late at night. And yeah, wish me luck. I won't need it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Adios.